Hey, welcome back to Garbeardia. I hope you guys had a pretty good break and festivities and all that. We're back on track. So, as always, be sure to stop by the Discord and all that. Stop by Redcon 1 where you get all your good supplements and foodie stuff. Stop by Skull Taker Dice if you need any dice sets and that kind of stuff. And be sure to stop by the coffee if you want to donate, all that good stuff. But this is a very fun chapter. Let's get into it. Chapter 2. Recover. After the news of what Prusik and his 601st Platoon had accomplished broke, it sent a ripple through those who knew of the Vale and of the humans now trapped on the other side. Valhalla Hill began to change rapidly from a forward operating base, FOB, to a more standard occupational base, at which the old fortifications were pushed out and further off the base's footprint. This allowed for quick expansion of the buildings and constructions that were being constricted by space, and engineers from all over the surrounding areas were arriving in droves to test their skill in metal. At one point during the rapid expansion, the human NCOs had to step in and make sure Valhalla Hill wasn't being dissected into districts, something that the natives were prone to doing simply out of habit. Things came to a head when Yule had to step in directly, and dragged each race's head of engineering into his office to berate them for nearly an hour. The boiling point for this meeting transpired after it became known that the head engineers of the Oni, brim-touched elves, and dwarves were beginning to get into competition with each other and make entryways unusable for other races, such as Oni having to bend and stoop through a door made for dwarves in order to get paperwork done. Piper found it to be an amusing problem, if anything, and quickly took hold of the situation with ruthless German efficiency. In the matter of a day, a strict building code was put into place with allowances for craftsman flair here and there, as long as it was spread evenly across all the races. With this in their hands and Yule's anger still in their minds, the engineers and craftsmen began to create and build brand new barracks, chow halls, warehouses, and even a hospital under the watchful eye of Piper that conformed to all the needs and desires of the races, or as much as they could allow. Goliath still had to bend and stoop from time to time, but they were used to it by this point. With Valhalla Hill growing at an exponential rate in order to accommodate the constant waves of recruits and soldiers, so did the small hamlet that had been attached to it the entire time. The hamlet exploded out into a town during the build-up, but soon grew into a full-fledged city when things came into full swing. Inns and homes began to crop up by the baker's dozen every day, a portion of which were bought and paid for by Yule to accommodate the survivors of Sanrion. Leadership in the town was minimal in the beginning, but it became quite clear to Yule that someone else would have to be in charge of the damn thing, as paperwork and requests from the folk living there came in wagon loads. Al Alori Respin was more than willing to take up the role once he had recovered fully, having lost a lot of his weight during his trials at the Vale base, and being bled every day in order to fuel their machinations. Yule again paid out a solid chunk of his own stockpiled gold to have Respin's old Sanrion town hall recreated, if a bigger and better version, near the center of the booming city. Al Alori Respin openly cried when he was led down a freshly cobbled street by Yule to see the building for himself. And the Valiev hugged Sesper Hesh, the only original craftsman from the first building to survive the Vale base. Sesper Hesh had been instrumental in recreating the old governmental building from Sanrion, and Yule stood by as the two Valiels hugged each other in shared grief. Al Alori Respin was then presented with his own rifle, pistol, and field cap when they entered the city hall, and Respin was confused. Just in case, Yule told him with a wink, and the southern elf chuckled happily. After a short vote, the city adjoining to Valhalla Hill was named Rade Sanrion, or New Sanrion. Under Respin's watch, the city continued to thrive, but still became divided by districts, unlike Valhalla Hill. Yule was tempted to step in and make them follow Valhalla Hill's rule, but thought that it may be too heavy-handed in an overstepping of his authority. While he may be commanding these troops, it could look overbearing and brash if he suddenly stepped in and made the civilians below the hill follow in line as well. The thought came back to him weeks later as he was having dinner with Olivara in the NCO's mess. Olivara found it quieter here than the shared dining facilities, and usually got her way when she demanded Yule join her for dinner instead of rubbing elbows with the lower enlisted. Yule never minded, as he found it amusing when Olivara would get possessive of him. As Olivara crunched happily on freshly baked bread, Yule leaned back in his chair, watching the warm butter smear up onto her cheek. "What am I, exactly?" he said in Tunka. Olivara stopped chewing for a moment and looked at him confused. Yule was reminded that she was no elven princess when she moved the bread in her mouth over to one side so she could speak, and she squinted her eyes quizzically.
"What do you mean, Juvik?"
"Since when does she call me sweetie?" Yule thought to himself, but sighed out a soft laugh as he leaned forward to wipe away the butter from her cheek with his thumb. "What am I to the other people? A warlord, a general, a king? What do they say about me?"
"Oh,"
she said hurriedly, and chewed rapidly to get the bread down her throat without coughing on it. She then took a glug of ale from a new glass beer mug and swished it around in her mouth before swallowing. When she opened her mouth to speak, Yule saw she still had a bit of bread crust in her teeth, and he smiled. Olivara continued.
"No one thinks ill of you, Yule. Keep that in mind. Well, except for the southern elves and the Fae, I suppose."
She smiled toothily and wrapped her hand around the mug.
"As for a king, no one believes you are a king. You lack bloodline and standing to be a king."
"I could be royalty. You don't know," Yule said in mock hurt, and the two laughed quietly to each other. Unbeknownst to Yule, Olivara did in fact know he was no royal, having sensed none of it on him or in his blood with her own gifts. She could also sense a lot of something odd coming from Yule. It felt a lot like self-doubt, but it was a very complicated emotion that she was having trouble understanding.
"As for a warlord, you don't behave like one. People believe that you are here for them and to help them. A warlord usually takes for themselves, so the profile doesn't fit you. Truth be told, Mère Chouvet, everyone simply knows you as the Veil Rider commander named Yule. You are neither general, nor king, nor warlord, or rogue. You are something else entirely. A being from the other side that is helping us survive and giving us technologies well beyond our wildest dreams. Take, for instance, this cup."
"Mug," Yule corrected her, as she held it aloft in her hand.
"Mug, yes. We had a grasp of how to make glass and how to shape it, but you demonstrated how to do it properly, and now even a common villager can enjoy high-quality glass like this. Gremlin has shown us how to make better footwear. Boots, slippers, these funny things called chucks that all the kids are begging for, the gift of electricity, and simple things like light bulbs."
Olivara paused and smiled down into the lightly frothing ale in her mug, then looked up at Yule with the same warm expression.
"If anything, we believe you are a gift, you and your people, all gifts to us. Without even a second thought, you began fighting for us and even turned away your own world to keep us safe. None of us understand why, either."
Yule pressed his lips into a line and leaned forward, resting his arms on the small table. His brows furrowed as he thought out his words carefully while Olivara's smile faltered, her face slowly falling into concern. She reached out with a hand and placed it on the table towards him, fingers together.
"You? Juvik, what is it?"
"We came out of greed, most of us," Yule finally said, reaching out with a hand to lightly place his fingertips just against hers. "We wanted to run away from our own lives. So we came here." Olivara's tendrils slowly snaked their way from the middle of her shoulder blades and around her neck to sit poised, facing Yule. However, nothing came from Yule, nothing loomed out of him, and no specters made an appearance. Her tendrils faltered as he continued to talk. "When we came here, we did not come as heroes. We were sent out by our country to scout out this place for our own taking. They never said it explicitly, but we knew what we were doing. It is only by luck that we are the gifts that you all believe us to be.
We are aware.
Olivara said with a lie, and Yule jerked up his head in surprise, having been looking at the tips of their fingers touching. You're aware? She lied again.
Of course we are aware. There's no need to feel bad about it or anything. Things change.
Olivara, there is no telling how good or bad we could have been when in comparison to the Fae. What if we had come through and there were no Fae? We would have come in droves and in massive arms, taking what we saw fit through force. Olivara moved her fingers forward just enough to cover his tips with hers.
But there were Fae. A force was set in motion that turned you to us. That is all that matters, Yule.
Her eyes flicked up and saw guilt slowly coiling around his neck, and her tendrils began to unhurriedly slither their way over towards it. She saw the guilt poise and coil tighter around Yule, and in response she saw his jaw tighten. But what if we hadn't? Yes, all these things happened and now we are on your side, but what if we hadn't been? Would it have all worked out the same? What's to say that I wouldn't have been a warlord or tried to make myself some kind of king in this place? It was Olivara's giggle that caused the guilt to lose its grip, and it was attacked en masse by her tendrils. The quivering mass gave a spectral wail before it was torn asunder by Olivara's many vines.
I don't see a warlord in you, nor do I see a bad man. If you ask me, Yule, I believe that you would have done the same things you have done in the end. Fate is fate, no matter how much you pull and tug at the web of our lives.
Yule kept his eyes on their fingers, then slowly turned his hand palm up, cradling her hand in his. You believe that I would have always found the right path then? That I would have always become what I am now? Olivara wiggled her fingers in between Yule's and clenched them, then looked up into his eyes.
I believe.
I wish I could say the same, Olivara, Yule murmured, resting his other hand on top of hers.
In time, I will help you believe,
she replied, and reached over with her mug of ale, softly setting it to his lips. The next morning, Yule awoke from beside Olivara with a flutter of eyelids. Her crimson hair was strewn across his face, and he had to blink a few times to get it free of his eyes. One thing Yule had learned was that Olivara's hair turned into a thicket after the two scratched the floorboards, and he brought up his hands, slowly trapping the strands of hair into bundles with hooked fingers. Once he had enough of it gathered, he flicked it up onto Olivara's pillow and sat up, brushing away any other strands that stubbornly stuck to his skin. He stretched with a crackle of muscles and sinew and groaned, gazing blearily out the window into the slowly rising sun. The base was beginning to come alive, personnel walking back from watches, others getting fires restarted, or going on to replace watches themselves. He looked down at Olivara and smiled indulgently, her warm skin exposed from him sitting up, the blankets being dragged down slightly. He took a finger and ran it caressingly down her shoulder, feeling the soft feminine hairs move underneath. He ran the finger down along her elbow, across towards her hand, then crossed his finger from where her hand lay on her ribs over to her breast. He gave a sharp circular trace around the tip of her soft mounds, and she giggled tiredly, groggily slapping his hand away.
No, too early.
Even for Warlord Yule? Yule asked, going in to give her another poke. Somehow, Olivara knew what he was after and grabbed his hand, stopping him a few inches short.
Especially for Warlord Yule.
She then kissed his knuckles and held his hand to her cheek, speaking groggily again.
Go have breakfast with your Joe-men. I'll see you at lunch.
Yule leaned down and kissed her shoulder before pulling his hand away gently. They're just called Joes, Olivara, but I will see you at lunch. She murmured something akin to a goodbye, her voice muffled by the blankets, and cocooned herself further in the covers. While Olivara was preparing to turn into a cotton butterfly, Yule got off the bed from his side and made his way over to his closet. After pulling on a fresh uniform and a pair of his old battered boots, he made his way down the stairs to the main lobby of headquarters. Waiting for him was Piper, happily drinking from a cup of tea, while across from him Chicks was angrily reading a report. Yule clapped Piper on his non-drinking shoulder and looked over to Chicks. Why are you in a bad mood? I took you for a morning person. Chix glowered up from her report and eyed Yule hotly.
You forget that you have neighbors, Yule. There are times where I would rather be in the barracks, and it's very rude to keep up private activities past midnight.
Piper coughed into his tea, catching back his laughter, while Yule scratched at his lip, looking anywhere but at Chix. Right, I'll be sure to keep a lid on that.
Or put shock absorbers on your bed legs,
Chix muttered, which caused Piper to break and guffaw out loud. Due to the size of the rooms and privacy, more than half of the human NCOs lived in the headquarters building. Yule's room was tucked away in a far corner, meaning he only had 2 direct neighbors, one of which was the fussy Chix. On the other side of Chix was Gremlin, and the two were driving her up a wall.
Seriously,
she continued, giving her report a flick.
Between you and the digital nympho next door, I lose hours of sleep a day. Can't you two go somewhere else like the rest of us civilized people?
Yule looked down at Piper, who was laughing toothily, and the German shook his head. Don't look at me for help. I keep things secret for a reason. Right, Yule said, but couldn't help the smile that broke his lips. I'll be sure to keep things quiet for your sakes, Chix.
Thank you,
she said angrily, and blinked down at her report. Over the next few minutes, the rest of the human NCOs with command duties came down from upstairs, last of which being Gremlin. Gremlin was one of the few human holdouts that did not wish for command, and instead acted as a lone operator, she in turn being in charge of intelligence gathering. With a yawn, she plunked down in a chair, Chix glaring at her the entire time from the corner of her eyes. An orderly walked in with a tray of locally made coffee mugs and a pot of kabar root tea. Kabar root, as far as the humans were concerned, smelled and tasted just like chicory root, but was instead called K-bar tea by the humans that mingled with the lower enlisted on a non-NCO basis. The name caught on fast, as well as the style of drinking it with milk and sweeteners. Yule poured a cup for himself and sat down in his chair, sighing as he did. So, what do we know today? Gremlin spoke first, yawning before she did. Her black hair was messy and disheveled, as well as her uniform, but this was a common appearance for her in the mornings before Fino woke up and made her dress appropriately.
Things are equalizing so far around here. It's been a month or so since we learned of what the Chosen Children are up to in Alberdand. The region is gigantic and spacious, so they have been moving slow along the villages. Corporal Ashuti from the 3rd Counterintelligence Group caught a spy trying to get into Ilm Norris, but they bit down on some kind of pill and killed themselves. We're not on the lookout around here for anything of the same. The Elves of Alberdand still appear to be against the Chosen Children, but there has been word that there are other Fey-aligned factions that still exist in the areas beyond. We have no idea what they are.
Chix spoke up next, cradling her rifle.
We are expanding steadily in troop numbers and are running training companies back to back. At the current time, we are at 2 large divisions, and we've had to start issuing NCO primary ranks since we aren't using the officer ranks. If you see an NCO with a golden top chevron, they're called their rank plus the term primary, such as Sergeant First Class Primary. They got the lovely duty of herding cats and take the place of their corresponding officer rank.
Donahue gave a snort. Still better than the officer corps if you ask me. All the work but none of the ego. Everyone around the table gave a chuckle, but Yule looked to Wolf next. How are we doing on supplies? Topped up with just about everything. We could set up on theater and have a wagon train a mile long if we wanted. There are enough bored civilians around that they would probably accompany us and support us along the way. To say the least, we are not found wanting for anything we need. There was also word of a supply train from Kerbedir coming in, but they said it was a surprise and didn't tell us anything else. The Harpy seem really excited about what is coming, though they too have been sworn to secrecy. Yule blinked. They've been sworn to secrecy from us? How? Dwarven gold and Fawcett's threats, Wolf said with a grin, and he sipped at his tea. Apparently he is very excited to be the one to break the news to you, and has threatened a slow death to anyone who ruins the surprise. Dramatics. Yule growled out with a sigh, and pointed to Gruesome. How about you? Valhalla Squad is currently in medbay for a small amount of time. They sustained multiple lacerations while smuggling in 10 direwolf puppies, but are in good spirits. The hounds are currently in the care of very worried druids, and they are attempting to pacify the animals. Luckily, they were freshly born and need milk, so they are needy. Yule chuckled. Just born, yet they cut up Valhalla squad. The pups are the size of Great Danes. I have to admit, they are cute though. Yule took a pull from his mug and cleared his throat. I suppose it's hoping too much for Pack Rat to die of his wounds. Afraid they're going to make a full recovery. Gruesome sniggered while everyone else in the room openly laughed. Yule turned to Cole and gestured at him with his cup. How about you? Anything new on your end? Cole got his humors under control and flipped through a report for a few pages. We're currently working through a lot of the bestiaries known to the locals and where we are going, and there are a lot of curious things that are in the area. We've been working on converting them to things we know in English, and besides dire wolves, there are also ripping badgers and some kind of gnoll running around the area in tribes. According to the locals, they call themselves Fui Klumni, or White Feathers. They are known to be some kind of druidic culture, like to gnaw on mushrooms and make salves. White Feathers are neutral as far as things go. We have to look out for the unicorns, though. Multiple people, including Yule, raised an eyebrow. He set down his cup of tea on the tabletop and fixed Cole with a quizzical look and a tilt of his head. We have to mine the unicorns? Cole tapped his finger on the report. Well, by the pictures, they are unicorns, but the Valley Elves call them a different name, as do the Brim-Touched. And what would that name be? Cole grinned shiftily. Well, they call them Burgate Gesturen. Murder horses? Domino cried out, and looked over towards Cole in shock. But they're unicorns! Look, the locals have stories about these things running around in small packs and goring people to death for fun. They don't even eat meat, they just like killing things. All I'm saying is that we should avoid trying to pet the pretty horses with spears on their heads. Yule scratched at his cheek with a finger and caught Piper's eye. Can we put in a note to our units to avoid the unicorns while over in Alberdand? Piper flipped his notepad around and displayed to Yule he had written down, "No touch death ponies," and Yule pointed a finger at the pad. That'll do. Yule picked back up his coffee mug of tea. Alright, so with the sudden loss of an enemy to the south, we are going to start moving west. Zerg Company is going to mop up what's left of the chosen children on their end, and we're going to send a few companies east to help deal with whatever else is on our side. We're going to treat this as a theater for now. We have an almost annoying amount of troopers running around, so we're going to head out in a single division, leaving what is basically another division here to help run shop. Piper is going to head the division here. Piper. Yule gestured to Piper, who finished sipping the last of his K-bar tea. There are humans left in the area. We do not know their allegiance. While Yule takes the division west, we are going to do our best to try and corral any humans running around the area and bring them back here for questioning. Besides that, keep training any locals that come in, keep them fighting fit, wait for orders. Who all wants to come west? Yule asked, and instantly Domino, Chicks, Cole, and Wolf raised their hand. Kentucky raised her own hand after a moment, but held it up with a finger raised.
Are you allowing the lone wanderers to come?
Yule rolled his eyes at the nickname. The humans who still operated on their own had taken up the moniker, separating themselves from titles of command and instead fighting alongside the auxiliaries. Yes, any Veil Riders allowed to come.
Alright, well, I'm coming as a solitary then. I'll pass off my company to Mullen. He was wanting a larger command. I would expect about 20 or so to tag along.
Yule poured himself another portion of tea, this one darker in color due to the tea sitting longer in the pot. There are not many of us left. They know that, right? Kentucky shrugged.
They know. They're here for a good time, not a long time.
Domino guffawed. Yeah, we know. They've been keeping the Lonesome Dove district in New Sandrion supported purely by their own patronage. Speaking of Lonesome Doves, will Severus be joining you? Yule asked, leaning his head towards Domino. Oh sure, her and her flight more than likely. Yule sucked his teeth shortly and muttered something rude into his cup. Oh, come on, Yule, Domino drawled. They'll be handy in combat and scouting. What are you talking about? We have Chickley and Eris. Domino tilted his head towards Yule and looked at him from under his brows. Yule, 2 sparrow harpies does not equal an entire flight of Himalayas. Yule knew this was true, and instead of arguing, he glared the doorway while sipping his tea. After a few more things regarding Valhalla Hill were discussed, Yule called the meeting to an end. Those inside the room shuffled out, and Yule closed the door behind him, turning to face the bustling headquarters man area and stretching. When he made it outside into the den of a military base going through its daily motions, he had taken less than 10 steps when he heard a familiar voice call out from above. Yule tilted up his patrol cap just in time to brace for the impact of Chickily, twisting with the dive bomb hug and turning on a heel with a twirl to keep from falling over. Chickily's raucous giggles sirened as Yule spun, until Yule finally stumbled to a stop. He gave a cough and looked down at the Harpy in his arms. Well, hey, bud. Finally back from Immel Norris.
No.
Chickily said happily, his Harpy uniform top turned almost 180 degrees in the wrong direction.
Chickily was on way when Chickily saw dwarfs coming down road. Come, come.
Chickily grabbed Yule's hand and Yule rolled his eyes, pulling his hand away and instead jogging alongside the Harpy. Chickily's feigned grin was wild as he catapulted himself down the pathways leading to the main gate, flapping at times to keep the speed high. Yule had switched from a jog to a run in order to keep up, and found that Chickily was just as fast on the ground as he was in the sky. By the time they reached the front gate, Yule had a stitch biting him around his right rib and beads of sweat were trickling down the small of his back. Chickily rocketed up into the sky, gave a warbled Harpy cry of alarm to the other gaggles of Harpies, and soon a whole roost of them were perched along the roofs of buildings, or perched atop whatever they could land on. Yule grimaced and leaned back, his hand pressing to the stitch. Chickily, come down here. What's going on? Chickily zoomed back down towards Yule and perched atop his shoulders where he liked to be, sitting down and wrapping his avian feet around Yule's neck.
The dwarves bring monsters.
Monsters? Yule mused, and began to walk towards the main gate, Chickily resting his wings on top of Yule's amulet-hiding patrol cap. Yule stepped past the gate out near the road where the turn-in began towards the base, and he squinted down the road, listening carefully. It took a few minutes to hear it past the tinnitus, but indeed, he could hear engines. When the first mantlet of a Dwarven Sturmgeschütz Mark IV came around the bend, rounding around a few scattered houses, Yule's lips bared his white teeth in a grin. Chickily rapidly tapped his wing claws on Yule's patrol cap and gave a high-pitched whistle, and a Dwarven tank commander reached down to blare the horn on the Stug. The Stug was a copy of a late war variety, bearing a Dwarven 75mm Pak 40 and rune-etched skirts on each side of it. Riding on the Stug were a couple of happily smiling auxiliaries, while on the very end of the barrel, a Harpy was perched and whistling back to Chickily. Behind the Stug were 6 1.5-ton T-214 Dodge trucks, all of which were packed to the racks with barrels of fuel and crates. Yule could see more vehicles trundling behind them, but they all halted once the Stug came to a stop a few feet away from Yule. The Dwarven tank commander popped up his goggles and saluted smartly. Mr. Yule, your order is ready. Permission to enter Valhalla Hill. Yule saluted back. Granted. Yule then turned and gestured for the gate to be opened, and when the halting bar swung away, a deafening cry erupted from the base. The Stug gave another bellow of its horn and lurched forward, rolling up and around the small bend into the base. The T-214s rolled by, their engines chugging along, with a long train of M3 Scout half-tracks and more T-214s following them. The M3 Scout vehicles only sported a single Dwarven M2 machine gun apiece, and they looked as if someone had taken the older vehicles and given them a professional facelift. He saw with amusement that a few of them even had beer keg holders near the rear, and he didn't remember those being mentioned in the schematics. Bizarrely, a pack of Daimler Dingo scout cars came roaring up the road and skidded around the curve, deciding not to be outdone purely because of their size. Yule had to step back a few feet to avoid the screeching wheels, but what he saw come around the bend next almost caused him to choke out in laughter. And these? 30 8-wheeled Puma scout cars rounded the bend with more grace than the Dingoes, their 75mm Pak 40 cannons raised high in salute to the base. These too had been dwarfified, bearing runes for speed all along the skirts for the wheels. As the last Puma came around the bend, more Stoogs appeared, some even having the short-barreled 75s instead of their longer cousins. 20 of these vehicles entered the base, and then Yule just shook his head as he spied Fockett sitting up proud in the commander's hatch of the last vehicles to be delivered by the dwarves. Yule had submitted the schematic as due diligence to throwing everything at the wall, hoping that what stuck. He had, however, no idea that the dwarves would actually take the Hetzer of, all things, seriously. But, as fate would have it, 20 Hetzers were making their own rumbling way down the road. The column stopped before Yule, and Fockett pulled up his own goggles in a smug flourish, letting them slap back against his forehead before leaning over and looking down at Yule. Fockett rested his arm on top of the top armor plate and placed his chin upon it, his beard dirty with oil and grease. "So, Veiling, I hope I did well in our agreement." "I guess they will have to do," Yule called out with a smile, and Fockett clapped his gloved hands together. "Guess so. Lots of work to do in a short amount of time, but we dwarves do like a challenge. Ha!" He clutched something at his throat and looked over his shoulder. "Panzerun Sokomen." The line of Hetzers moved off into their first gear all at the same time and motored up into Valhalla Hill. Chickily was still happily whistling shrilly from on top of Yule's shoulders and was starting to get the humans' ears ringing in an unpleasant fashion. Yule gave the Harpy a pat on the legs and began to walk back up into the base with everyone else who was, all of them chasing the vehicles and trying to get a better look at them. Yule looked up at Chickily, who was still grinning widely, and he straightened his patrol cap. "So, Chickily, what do you think?" Chickily looked down at Yule, excitement flashing in his eyes.
I want to ride in one.
"I think you'll get plenty of that here soon," Yule said with a chuckle, and returned the salute of the gate guards as they swung the blocking arm back into place. And that's the end of this chapter of the Veil Riders, Book 2. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you guys enjoyed the the vehicles. But yeah, remember, if you like the story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to Garbeardia and click the bell icon so you know when the vehicles, so you know when the videos are released through the week. Additionally, join the Discord. We're all in there. And just so you guys know, we are still working on the tabletop game for the Veil Riders. It's gonna be like D&D, but with guns and grenades. It's coming out pretty good. Actually, we did a few test games. It seems to work pretty good. If you really like the story, be sure to stop by the coffee. If you want, drop $1 or $2 if you so wish. And those of you who gave gifts to me and the Bell Dam over the holidays through coffee, thank you very much. It's extremely appreciated because YouTube ain't doing it for us, I'll tell you that much. But regardless of what happens, we will be here to write and voice the stories that you like. Oh, goodness. You guys tired? I'm tired. Until I see you next time on this side of the veil, this has been Guard Bro, this is the Bell Dam, and this is Garbeardia.
All those moments will be lost in time.